Since I've been in the gun game, and that's about 10 years now, the conventional wisdom was that someone who didn't want to learn how to use a handgun should get a J-frame or some sort of other small revolver. As if moving the trigger to the rear on a small semi-auto is somehow harder than a small revolver. So I'm seeking to answer that question today is, should you be recommending small revolvers to people who are uninterested in guns? Are you ready? Stand by. Welcome back to the Humble Marksman channel. I'm David, and this is a Smith Wesson 442. And we're going to set out to try and answer the question of, like, if you don't want to get into guns, should you get a small revolver? I'm going to shortcut that for you and just say no, but I'll support that with reasons why. But before we do that, we'll end up reviewing the gun and just letting you see what one of the most iconic guns is. And this is this 442-2, as I mentioned. But before we do that, if you like my content, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. And this is my personal appeal to you. It's a big goal of mine in the year 2022 to get a silver play button at YouTube for 100,000 subscribers. 75% of my views come from people who are unsubscribed. I will try to make all of my content worth your time and attention. If you would please just do me the honor of subscribing to the video. And before moving off that, I have to talk to my YouTube manual reviewer. This video, no doubt like all the other ones, was automatically demonetized, so now you're watching it. And you're in an unfair position asked to enforce gun rules on something you know nothing about, which is guns. If you think that this gun is modified in any way, a 70-year-old design on a revolver, a freaking grandpa gun, then I worry about your ability to get both legs in your pant legs and walk around your house. So as I mentioned, I'll give you a brief review of the J-frame revolver from the Smith & Wesson. First, kind of what it is a snub-nose revolver with a 1 7/8 inch barrel, which makes an absolutely itty-bitty barrel length on an aluminum frame with a steel barrel and steel cylinder. The trigger is double action only, coming in at about 11 pounds. We'll talk more about that later. And the reset is unloaded gun. The reset is so all the way down and then all the way out. It is an athletic gun to shoot since the trigger pull is approximately 10 times the weight of the gun. The sights are blacked target sights. There is a channel kind of milled on top of the frame with a ramped front sight that allows you to kind of line it up. Since it is such a small gun, it really is shot better, at least by me, shooting with one hand. And that's honestly what I'd recommend. There's just absolutely nowhere to kind of put your support hand, and when I did find where that was supposed to be, it just didn't seem to increase the shooting experience. Like, it was actually more pleasant for me to shoot with one hand on the gun. It is a 5-shot revolver of 38 Special Plus P. Plus P means that the ammo is 10% hotter than a standard pressure loading. The trigger pull quality is actually quite good. It has a tiny little bit of stacking, but for the most part is a pretty linear pull. The shape of the trigger is very good and promotes kind of like a hooked first knuckle sort of pull, and that's how I was addressing the trigger. Carrying a gun like the Smith & Wesson J-frame is absolutely delightful. Now, everyone uses the trope that if you carry a gun this small and light, then it's like it's not even there, you don't even notice it. But the reality is that just about every gun in an inside the waistband holster, you're always gonna kind of know it's there. It's not that comfortable, you just kind of get used to it. This gun is as close to having a gun on that I could forget about as any gun that I've ever carried. The comfort is exceptional. I was carrying it in a Harry's Holsters Icon holster. There's a discount code at the bottom of the screen where you can save 10%. I really enjoyed carrying this gun. I really enjoyed shooting this gun despite being terrible at it. The trigger pull is very heavy and long. The sights are very bad. And that's gonna segue into why I don't think that we should be recommending J-frame revolvers to new shooters anymore. So first, let's talk about the trigger pull. The trigger pull on this gun is 11 times what the whole gun weighs. Let that sort of sink in. The method for shooting any handgun accurately with a double action trigger is going to be locking out your wrist. And learning to lock out your wrist is not a skill that you just kind of figure out on your own without somebody telling you, so you're welcome. The trigger is super long, and if you were to do, I guess, a cylinder dump and want to get all 5 shots off in a hurry, because it's difficult to pull the trigger rapidly, it takes a while and it's going to wear out your finger. It is an effort to get through the guns. Next, we talked about the sights on the pistol. The sights having kind of the black on black sight setup, and the fact that the little notch itself is super shallow. So while it's not easy to pull the trigger straight to the rear without moving the sights, it's also very difficult to just get the sights lined up on target. Because the barrel is less than 2 inches long, so the actual sight radius, the area between the rearmost part of the rear sight and the front sight, is super short. It's smaller than what it would be on a comparably sized semi-auto. So what that means is any little disturbance in the sight is going to telegraph more error downrange. Aiming the gun precisely is a skill in and of itself, so it's difficult to aim. So moving on from that, the gun is difficult and punishing to shoot. And what I mean by that is the guns are flippy. Now, unlike a semi-auto where the slide actually comes like past the web of your hand, it feels like the gun's gonna kind of jump out of your hand. They're very muzzle flippy. And with the heavier self-defense type loadings, like it's gonna let you know that it is a heavy loading in a gun this small and light. So that's another way of saying the gun is unpleasant to shoot should you ever actually try and shoot it to get like pass a concealed carry type license if you live in one of those types of states. If you're having a recreational day of target shooting, the amount of times you have to stop after 5 shots and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and go again, it takes forever. I went to go shoot this gun to get a taste for it, do a little bit of filming, anticipating that I would go through my typical complement of about 150 to 200 rounds in an hour. I made it through about 75 to 80 rounds just because it takes so darn long to load the cylinder. And building on that point, it only carries 5 rounds. Now, my P365 XL Romeo 0 that I use basically every day, it's roughly the same size, it's a little bit heavier, it has a superior sighting system, and it carries 13 rounds. This has 5. So we've got our small gun that's more difficult to aim, more difficult to make hits with, and you only get 5 chances to try and connect on a hit. So far, our avatar shooter's not having a good day. And finally, the 2-inch barrel that makes the gun so darn concealable is kind of a liability with respect to getting good velocity out of self-defense loadings. And what I mean by that is the 38 Special Plus P, which is super punishing to shoot, it got about the same velocity as a short barrel 9mm in standard pressure. So for 120 grains, it was coming in at just under 1,000 feet per second. Now, what was interesting is the wad cutter round, which a lot of people recommend carrying in these things, it was hovering at about 600 feet per second at the muzzle, which is about halfway between paintball velocities and slow pistol cartridges. So if you intend to use this for self-defense, you certainly need to find good loads that are going to achieve self-defense type velocities. And moving on from there, it's difficult to find ammo for 38 specials these days. So when I got this gun to make this video, I checked 3 different sports stores trying to buy ammo for the thing. Ultimately had to end up buying ammo off the internet to make these videos for you. Like, I couldn't find 38 special aside from Rat Shot, which is not something anybody should be interested in. So ammo is difficult to find. Oh, and it's expensive at about $35 a box in the first quarter of 2022, which is about $10 over the going rate of 9mm. And so kind of the final nail in the coffin for the sort of small revolver as a self-defense tool is it's difficult to use, it's expensive to use, and remember the 21-foot rule, which is basically inside of 21 feet, a knife has an advantage over a pistol. That is widely accepted as doctrine in the law enforcement community, and these guns are referred to as phone booth fighters because they're so darn hard to make hits with. Like, outside of 3 to 5 yards, it's very difficult to shoot precisely with a gun like this. So if this is so difficult to shoot, why are we recommending it? Like, if a knife is better inside 21 feet, why don't we just recommend somebody buy a knife? Or maybe just pepper gel. Pepper gel is going to be easier to hit with, and if you don't know the laws of self-defense in your state, it's a lot easier to go trigger happy with some pepper gel than it is potentially a life-ending item like a J-frame. Now, I need to follow those statements with the caveat that I am not a lawyer and I do not know the rules of your state, so seek legal counsel for all of that kind of stuff, but I can say that I fully support responsibly armed Americans getting firearms, but I just kind of question at this point whether it should be a J-frame revolver. Even as a backup gun, like historically police have carried revolvers, so they carried J-frames as backup guns. Well, this day and age, if the gun number 1 is a semi-auto, the index on a J-frame is completely different than the index on basically any semi-auto pistol. Like, how you have to roll your wrists over to get the sights to kind of line up is completely different from a standard pistol grip. So it truly becomes kind of a get off me gun at that point. And would you be better served by a pistol that has better sights and is easier to shoot and more capacity for not a lot more weight. Like close to 20 ounces, you can have one of the micro 9s set up for concealed carry, and they'll be easier to make hits with, and they'll be more pleasant to shoot. And that's not me coming after this particular gun. I like this gun a lot. It reminds me of the J-frame that was left to me by my grandfather that was unfortunately stolen from my apartment when I was a young man. It's a difficult gun for me to shoot. I can't shoot it to my standard of excellence.
My accuracy is not great, so I guess that's gonna be one over there. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So I'm going to continue to shoot it. I actually enjoy shooting it, not because it's fun to shoot, but it presents a challenge to me, a challenge that I intend to master. Now, there are people who have mastered the J-frame revolver and make hits out at like 25 or even 100 yards. Those people are the exceptions, not the rule. Like just because something is capable of it, like a professional race car driver can make whatever nonsense daily driver you have look significantly faster if you took it to a track rather than when you got behind the wheel. But the exception doesn't sort of prove the rule. And if you're somebody who's in this position, test it yourself. Go to a range and rent a J-frame and rent some other kind of gun and see which gun you can shoot more accurately. Like, is it the J-frame? Maybe it is, but I doubt it. It's probably gonna be the semi-auto. So that's kind of the J-frame stuff. I would say that recommending small revolvers to people who are uninterested in shooting is just basically asking for them to miss their targets. I'd love to hear your thoughts on J-frame and revolvers in general in the comments below. Let me know what your thoughts are. YouTube thinks you'll enjoy this video, and I have picked this one for you. I appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.